Kettle Donuts. I get more requests for this recipe than any other, and today I'm going to show you how to make them. The things that we're going to need are a mixing machine is usually used, but today I'm going to make this without even using a mixing machine. I'm just going to mix it by hand, and I'll show you how. You're going to need a rolling pin or a stick. You're going to need some measuring tools, cups, or a scale. I prefer to scale. Going to need a skillet for frying them because these are deep fried, and you'll need some shortening. Shortening is the best thing to use to fry, although you could use oil if you like. The ingredients that you're going to need: 3 sticks of butter. That's the first thing you have to take out. You have to let that warm up. That needs to be softened before we can start the recipe. But the dough is going to be made from milk, oil, eggs, sugar, yeast, salt, and flour. Now the yeast, this is a dry instant yeast. I recommend using dry instant yeast instead of active dry yeast, the little packets that really don't work all that well. But if you get a package of this, you open it up and you can save the remainder in a jar, and it'll last you like a whole year. If you leave it in the refrigerator, you can use it for a long time. This is a really good product to use. You're also going to need powdered sugar. We're going to need that to make the glaze, and I'll show you how to make that also. And the last thing we're going to need is the recipe. I've set this recipe up so that it's in weights. That's how I'm going to measure my ingredients. But I also have it so that you can measure it in cups or spoons if you like, if you don't have a scale. And there's also a metric conversion for it as well. So I'll be back in a few minutes. I'm going to measure up all my ingredients. I'm going to measure each of my ingredients in a separate container so I can double check them, and I'll show you how to do the mix. I'll see you in a few minutes. I'm back now, and I've got all my ingredients measured up. My 3 sticks of butter, I'm going to set them aside. They're soft, they're warmed up. We're not going to use those, so I'm just setting them aside. I measured up all my ingredients with my scale. The yeast that I measured up, I put the rest of it into a jar. This yeast will last in a jar. You put it in your refrigerator or freezer, it'll last for like a year, so you don't have to throw any of it out. So to mix this recipe, I'm going to mix everything except the flour. I just have to put all these ingredients in the bowl without the flour and just stir them up. I'm mixing this by hand because you can mix it with a mixing machine, but the first person that asked me to give this recipe asked if they can mix it by hand, and I said, sure, give it a try. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm just mixing all that up to try to dissolve all those ingredients into the milk before I add my flour. That's good enough. I'm going to add my flour right now. I let the milk warm up a little bit because you don't want to have this be too cold. I'm just going to stir this. It's going to start to turn to a dough, and after it's mixed, all the flour is mixed in, I'm going to mix it just for a minute or two. So I'll be back as soon as this is ready. I've mixed this for about 2 minutes. The dough is kind of sticky, and now it's ready. I'm going to just pour it out onto a tray. So I'm going to just drop it onto this tray. I put a little bit of flour on it. I'll use a spatula just to clean off all the extra dough. I'm not going to do anything with this dough yet. I'm just going to flatten it out, and I'm going to cover it with some plastic. I'm going to put it in my refrigerator for about a half hour. I'll see you back in a half hour, and I'll show you how to roll the butter into it. So I took my dough out of the refrigerator. This was in the refrigerator for about a half hour to rest, and it's ready to roll. We're going to roll the butter into it to make it into a laminated dough. I already prepared 2 pieces of butter by rolling them out. I'll show you how I'm going to do the third one. It's just a matter of this butter is a kind of a plastic temperature. We're just going to roll it out gently to make it about the same size as the piece of paper that it was wrapped in. This is the paper that it was wrapped in. If it's about the same size, it's just right. So now I'm going to take the dough, place it on the bench, and I'm going to shape it with my hands into a rectangular shape. About as rectangular, square corners as I can get it. It's always good to have nice square corners on this. And then I'm going to take the butter. I'm going to place the butter to cover 2/3 of this dough. So I have 2. And then I'm going to take the other one and I'm going to break it in half. Put it like that. So 2/3 of the dough approximately are covered with butter. I'm going to fold this over. And fold it over again. And now it's ready to give it a roll. Now, you can, if you have a regular rolling pin, you could use a regular rolling pin, or you could even use a simple rolling pin, a stick. And I think I'll do that for this one, just to show you that you really only need simple tools to do this. We didn't even use a mixing machine. And just with this simple dowel, I'm gonna roll it out. We're gonna do this 3 times, but not all at once. We're gonna do the first one now. I'm going to fold it. I'm going to fold it into thirds. That's 1/3. Now it's 2/3. Now I'm going to put a finger mark in it. I'm going to put it back on the tray. Cover it back with the plastic. I'm going to let this rest for about 15 minutes. And I'll come back and I'll give it another roll. So I let this dough rest for about 15 minutes. I'm going to give it another roll. Just lift it up, place it on the work table. I think I'll use my same dowel stick that I used before. I'm going to repeat this process once more now, and then one more time at the end, and it will be finished. You can see the layers of butter in it. That's where all the flavor comes from. So I'm going to fold this into thirds. 1/3 there. Fold over the other third. And that's finished. I'm going to put this on the tray. We're going to put 2 marks in it. That's the way I remember that I have to give it 2 rolls, and I have to give it 1 more roll, and it'll be finished. Okay, I've let this rest for about another 15 or 20 minutes, and I'm going to give it the last fold. Now, after I give it the last fold, I'm going to cut this in half, because the amount of dough that I have here is enough to make 32 kettle donuts, which is kind of a lot. And I don't want to make 32 kettle donuts today, but I'm going to make 16. So I'm going to cut this in half and save the other half in the freezer. The other half can stay in the freezer for quite some time. You could probably keep it in your freezer for up to a month and it'll still work. So that dough is completed now. I have given it 3 folds. All I have to do is cut it in half. I'm going to save 1/2. This is going to be for our demonstration video a little bit later on. I'm going to show you how to portion those out into kettle donuts. This half, I'm going to wrap it in plastic. As long as it's wrapped tightly, it's perfectly okay to keep this in the freezer for up to a month. And you can make kettle donuts on another occasion, or there's even some other neat things you can make with it, since this is like a Danish dough. So this one's going in the freezer. This one we're going to use later on. So this dough has relaxed in the refrigerator for several hours, and I'm going to make up the kettle donuts. I'm going to show you how we shape them. This dough can stay in the refrigerator for a few hours, or you could even leave this in the refrigerator overnight and work on these the next day or even a couple days. This dough is perfectly fine if it stays in the refrigerator for a few days. So it's best to plan ahead, make this dough ahead of time, and then you can make them up when you're ready. I'm also not going to let these rise and fry them today, because I'm going to fry them on a different video tomorrow. And I'm rolling this dough out. You want to try to keep it nice and square. I'm going to try to get this to be a square piece of dough, about 12 inches by 12 inches. There we go. It's almost there. So it didn't take long at all to do that. That's roughly 12 by 12, but I'll double check it with my tape measure. I got the corners nice and square. Always try to keep the corners square instead of rounded. We have, 12 inches. 12 inches. If you're using metrics, it's about 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters. And now we're going to cut this into 16 pieces, which is very easy. We're going to mark it 4 by 4. And that's going to give us 16 pieces. So I'm just going to use a knife. I'm going to cut it in half. I'm going to cut the other one in half. And another one in half. And that's if you have a knife. If you have a pizza cutter, you could use a pizza cutter. Cut that in half. Then each half I'm going to cut in half. 4 by 4 makes 16. So now I'm going to start shaping these into kettle donuts. And I'm going to sprinkle some flour on this tray, because this tray is what we're going to use to let them rise. So we're going to put a little bit of flour on there so they don't stick. And we take each piece of dough and you poke a little hole in it, stretch it almost like a diamond shape with a little hole in the middle, and then all you do is you push one end through and pull it through. If you want to slow that down on slow-mo or back it up and see it over again, you can. There's another one. I'm going to place them on this tray 4 by 4. Poke a hole in the middle, pull one end just through, and then kind of squeeze it back together. So I'll do one more, and then we'll be back when we're finished making all these up, and I'll get ready for the next stage. I'm just about finished making up the last couple of these kettle donuts, and I'm going to cover these with plastic. Now these have to rise, and as I said, I'm not going to cook these today. I'm going to cook these tomorrow. I usually make them ahead of time and do them the next morning. So I can let these rise a little bit now for maybe an hour or so, let them warm up. They're going to puff up a little bit, just a little. Then I'll put them in the refrigerator, and tomorrow morning when I'm ready to cook them, I'm going to take them out about maybe an hour or two beforehand because they need to rise more in the morning before they're ready to fry. That's what the yeast is for, to make them rise. And the speed at which they rise depends on the temperature. If it's cold out, they're not going to rise fast, and if it's warm out, they are going to rise pretty fast. So we'll just keep an eye on it, and I'm going to put these away, and we'll see you in the morning when we're ready to cook them. So it's the morning, and I've taken out my kettle donuts, so they're starting to rise. I let these rise about an hour yesterday before I put them in the refrigerator. Then I put them in the refrigerator overnight. And this morning I took them out and let them rise a little bit more. A trick to get them to rise a little faster on a cold day was I took a couple of cookie trays. I had a couple extra cookie trays. I warmed them up in my oven and then got them to about 200 degrees. And I put the tray on top like that. And that added a little bit of warmth to them, which helps them rise. I have my fat set up. I'm going to heat that up soon so we can start to fry. But before I do that, I'm going to mix the glaze because we need to dip these in glaze. To do the glaze, it's on the recipe card. There's 10 ounces of powdered sugar and 2 ounces of water. I'm just going to pour that 2 ounces of water in, and just a regular spoon, I'm going to stir it up. And this should turn into like a smooth, glazy syrup. And the viscosity is important. If it's too thick, they're not going to look good. And if it's too thin, it'll be too runny. It'll just melt off. So I'm going to try to get it just right. I'll show you how to adjust it. After it stirs up, you can see that it's coming out kind of shiny. Actually, it looks pretty good, but the way I check it is just to dip my finger in it and see how much it flows. I think I may need to add a little more water to this. That looks a little thick. It's not flowing that well, so I'm going to put just another splash, stir that in. That'll make this nice and shiny for when we dip these donuts in the glaze. We're going to dip them in the glaze warm as soon as they come out of the fat. They just drain off a little bit, and then we dip them in the glaze. I'm also going to make some with cinnamon sugar. That looks much better. I have some cinnamon sugar here, and you don't need the recipe for that. So we'll be back in a few minutes to fry the donuts. So I've started frying these, and I'm gently lifting them up from the tray and placing them into the hot oil. This oil is about 1 inch deep, and I check the temperature to make sure that I have about 350 degrees. I have a little thermometer that I dipped in there. The oil is at 350. These take about 1 minute to fry on each side. Now with deep fat frying, I really just like to recommend that you think about safety. You don't want to do this when there's little kids running around. You want to make sure that you're wearing long pants and long shoes, because you don't want to have any oil spill on your skin. Don't wear shorts. Maybe even keep a fire extinguisher around, or at least a can of salt, because if there's a fat fryer, water can't put this out. It'll only make it worse. But you can sprinkle salt on a fire, and that'll make it go out. So those are cooked on one side. I'm letting them fry up on the other side. And as soon as these come out, I'm going to show you how we dip them in the glaze. I already have some of these finished off, and I have 8 more to do. Just a little bit more. You can see that these fry very quickly. They're ready. I'm going to start taking them out. while they're still hot, we dip them right into the glaze. So that's still warm, dip it in the glaze. See the nice shine on that glaze? It sort of melts off as it sits and becomes even glossier. All right, and we'll be back to show you the last 4. Okay, I just finished frying the last of these, making the last 3 or 4 of these with cinnamon sugar. Just rolling those in the cinnamon sugar when they're warm. It'll stick nicely. And there are 16 fresh, warm kettle donuts for you. Now, this seems like it's a kind of a long process, and it really is, but it only takes a few minutes for each step. And if you do want to make these, you've got to plan ahead. So if you're thinking of making them on a weekend, on a Sunday or something for your family, maybe you gather your ingredients on Friday and make the dough and roll it and shape them on Saturday, and then you'll be all ready to make them on a Sunday morning. The first time you make them, they may not come out so good, but if you do it again, I'm sure that they'll be much improved. You'll definitely get better with practice, so don't give up, and certainly enjoy.